Welcome back. I'm excited to have you join us for our Working Remotely with NASPA's Recruitment, Engagement, and Volunteerism team, also called the REV team. Today we'll have a little time to introduce each of us, but just so you know, I'm Danny Anzueto, Associate Director of the REV team, joined by Colleen Doherty, Jordana Taylor, and Nathan Victoria.
Awesome. So good afternoon or good morning, everyone. My name is Nathan Victoria, and I'm the Senior Director for the REV team. You've probably seen this meme go around over the past few days. I think it was going around Instagram on my feeds yesterday. And I want to highlight the first point in particular. You're not working from home. You're at your home doing a crisis trying to work. As we've talked about here in the NASPA Central Office about how we can best support the field, and you that are attending and listening to this live briefing, we realize that we have a unique vantage point here on the REV team. We've actually been remote as NASPA staff probably for about the past 4 years, but as a team, we have a variety of different arrangements where some of us are able to work from home permanently, some work from home and could go into the office, some are more office-based, some are not based in the DC area, so they don't have the ability to go to what was formerly the main NASPA office. This idea of trying to work and during a crisis, you'll see we're all from a variety of backgrounds, locations. Right now, I'm actually outside on my deck because my daughter is napping. And if she hears me speak at all, she will wake up. So we just wanted to remind you and kind of frame this that we are in some, as everyone says, unprecedented times as we think about what COVID-19 and how that's affecting the higher education space. But what we want to do with our time together today is share a little bit about who we are as a REV team, how we help support student affairs and what we do, but then also share some tips and tricks that we've been able to work together over the past 2 years as a team together to think about how you can move forward. And perhaps as we adjust back to a new reality, hopefully this fall, if not sooner, if remote work does become more of a possibility in your future, that you can take some of these principles and apply as you move forward. You'll see, obviously you can see our web cameras, but on the next screen, you'll see the REV team. And this was at our staff retreat last year. On Wednesdays, we do wear pink. So just a little bit about who REV is and what we do. We'll talk a little bit about NASPA. But if you think of NASPA as a college campus, we like to think of REV as the Student Affairs Division. We're the ones that are welcoming you to the organization. We're trying to get you involved. We know that as you're involved, you're more likely to stay a member and you move up into these senior leadership ranks. So that's kind of a little bit who we are. And again, there's more information that you'll be able to learn about us at a later point. So I will start as I'm in the wind tunnel. So again, my name is Nathan Victoria. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm the Senior Director of Recruitment, Engagement, and Volunteerism here within the NASPA office. I've been at NASPA about 12 and a half years. Previous to that, I come from the field. My master's degree is in higher education and student affairs. And I help kind of coordinate and move forward kind of the different initiatives of the REV team.
And I'm Jordana Taylor. I serve as the Associate Director for the REV team. I'm been at NASPA for about 4 years. I've been working fully remotely for about 1.5 years. And prior to this, I worked in higher education, primarily in enrollment management.
I'm Danny Anzueto. All pronouns work for me. I'm the other Associate Director for the REV team. I work fully remotely from Miami, Florida. Although I spent my first 3 years with NASPA working in the DC office.
And I'm Colleen Doherty. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm the REV team coordinator. I primarily work out of the DC office, so obviously right now I am currently working from home, like we all are.
So for those of you who may have joined us earlier, you heard a little bit more about our NASPA history, but NASPA, prior to our current name, was the National Association of Student Personnel Administrators. So it was a really nice way to wrap up our name and have a nice acronym. But as the profession itself evolved, we are now known as NASPA, Student Affairs Administrators in Higher Education. We were founded in January 1919 as the National Association of Deans and Advisors of Men. And over the last 100 years, we have evolved to become a much more diverse and wonderful organization and association, and that has really branched out to a number of different areas within higher education.
NASPA just celebrated its 100th anniversary about 2 years ago. So if you go to the history.naspa.org webpage, you can see more information about NASPA and a cool timeline. So as far as the staff structure and how NASPA is organized, similar to your campuses, there are different departments. The REV team sits within our operations branch, and that is the branch that really keeps the trains running, our finances, our HR, our membership, IT, communication team. We also have our professional development team, and that's the team that really focuses on our conferences and events, our live briefings, kind of the education side of NASPA. And then our research and policy team, and that team really focuses on the external facing areas of NASPA. Many of our grants are housed within research and policy, supporting our faculty, etc. We have 70 staff members, and as we will talk about, we were originally a DC-based office. So up until 2011, we were all in the DC office with the exception of one staff member. In 2014, NASPA merged with the Bacchus Network, which had a physical office out in Denver, and then that created the opportunity for more remote staff, and we kind of had a Denver office and a DC office. And as we've evolved, and Danny will talk in a little bit, we've kind of evolved this structure, but currently we're in a mix of DC-based staff that aren't in the DC office but are remote, and then remote staff throughout the continental US.
So as Nathan just noted, we have a large staff across the continental US. The majority of our staff at this point are currently in the DC office on the East Coast. And as he noted, we also have a large selection of staff in the Denver office. But as you can see from the map here, we have staff working all over the continental US, from Washington State to Vermont and Connecticut, all the way down to Florida, the Florida Panhandle, and in Texas as well.
So Nathan, go for it, sorry.
So as we mentioned, we were a DC-based office, and formerly we were the Member Engagement and Student Initiatives team. And Danny, we had the opportunity to expand our team, and we had an opening, and Danny was hired in 2015? No, 14? 2013. And Danny had the opportunity to move up from Miami up to the DC office. Once we were rocking and rolling, and we had a great team. And Danny had the opportunity to move back to the homeland, back home to the Miami area. And as we looked into evolving the organization and evolving our work, what we decided was to take an opportunity and take a chance. Danny had not worked remotely. I have not supervised remotely, but we wanted to give the opportunity and kind of give us a 3-week trial period. That has been about 3.5, 4 years now. And I think we've only grown as a team since then. Jordana came on next as our team member, and as she noted, she was a DC-based staff member. But through conversations and looking kind of at her responsibilities and the work that she was responsible for, we thought we'd also take the opportunity to kind of look at what a fully remote option would be. Even though Jordana is in drivable distance to the staff office, we kind of looked and realized that if there are responsibilities that make sense to come in, let's work that out and plan. But for the most part, let's look at what it is to be working remotely. Colleen is the newest staff member to the REV team, and for us, as we looked at our responsibilities, and we'll talk about how we work together as a supervisor, as a peer, and then as a colleague to other individuals, we realized that we did need some place-based location support. That's really where Colleen plays a role within our team in that area.
So just to give a little bit of insight on the policies that NASPA has related to remote work, I think as Nathan shared, we saw a change not just in the policies that we implemented, but the language that we used. We moved away from being a central office with remote staff to really having an understanding that we are a dispersed workforce. It includes employees in multiple states, office locations, including home offices. We reclassified what our work locations look like. So like I am home-based. I have a permanent remote office. We have part-time remote offices where there's an even split between a remote office and either the DC or Denver offices. Occasionally remote where everyone is mainly based in the DC or Denver office, but there are opportunities to work remotely, or if there's travel that's necessary, you can continue to work while you're traveling. And then non-remote, which is fully based in the DC Denver office. In response to COVID-19, our office has gone fully remote. Everyone is working from home and is now experiencing what most of you all are experiencing on campus, of having this remote life that I have been able to appreciate and treasure for the past 2.5 years. So as we decided to go virtual, it meant that a lot of our programming also had to go virtual. So our day-to-day management through virtual means is through systems such as this, Ring Central, where we host a lot of our team meetings normally, and we do our staff meetings, as well as Glip, which is our kind of chat channel. If you're familiar with Slack or things like that, it's very similar. We have had to rethink what engagement looks like in this time, and for us, that our team specifically, that looks like this, the virtual conference for emerging professionals, providing an unconference experience for you all so that we're able to allow presentations that were supposed to happen at the annual conference take place in a virtual space.
So we did have a live briefing. I'm going to come out of the sun and cut my microphone and see if that helps. So we did have a live briefing on Monday during our virtual highlights called Supervising a Virtual Team. And for those of you that are with us today, I just pasted into the chat the link to the virtual highlights. The live briefing was, again, Supervising a Virtual Team. It was Monday on March 30th from 2:45 to 4. For those of you that are listening to this recording, we should have the recordings up by the end of next week. So please feel free to access that for individuals that are managing remote workers. And I'll say there are a lot of great tips and advice. To add to, I think, those conversations and the pieces that were talked, it's important that as a supervisor, and I think this is if you're remote or if you're not managing remotely, the opportunity to hold regular one-on-ones and don't cancel them. Again, I think it's this concept that your one-on-ones don't necessarily need a full agenda, but if you are planning to meet with individuals, it's just like if you're on campus. If you need to go someplace, you wouldn't show up late. You wouldn't tell people that you're not running late and just not show up. So even though it is a virtual room, even though this seems a bit new to us, many of us have been using virtual media to connect with our colleagues, whether it's through texting or GroupMe or FaceTime or WhatsApp or these other areas. So I think a lot of the policies and procedures and the way you'd act within those technology do translate when you're managing. And it's important, I think, as this manager to make sure that you do have standard meetings, because you don't have the opportunity when you're working remote to just pop over to someone's office. So creating opportunities to have consistent check-ins is important. For me as a supervisor, it was always important to have an open door policy. And I think rethinking what does that look like? We know many of our colleagues might not have the opportunity to just pop in, but how are you using some of this virtual media? Again, we've used Ring Central, but there's free things such as Slack. And how are you making sure that individuals know that you are accessible, but also the times when you're not accessible? Are you using your Outlook calendar? Are you using your Google Calendar? How are you making sure that individuals are aware of what's going on? This idea of flow of information, I think, is something that as I'll own it, a millennial supervisor, and I think someone that's kind of rethinking what supervision looks like. So often, I think we require that information flows up, but we don't require that it flows down. And I think not only during this time of COVID-19 and this adjustment, but as we move forward, and hopefully what you were doing before, is that this flow of information needs to go all ways. This concept of radical transparency is something that I encourage and try to implement within the REV team. And this idea of asking, well, why can't we share this down? Or what is the harm if other people know of information? So I think this idea of making sure that the flow of information goes all ways, and that you find ways to make sure that this flow moves forward. This concept of trusting your staff, I know, is something new for managing remote workers, and I think this is similar even for those of you that may be supervised student staff. But I think it's shifting mostly, you'll see this fifth bullet point, of shifting the difference between deliverables and hours. The old school model of supervision, and I think what people were doing before we were in this remote capacity, is being in a seat or being in the office means you're doing work. And if I don't see you, if I don't know what you're doing, then you aren't working. And I think what COVID-19 and this shift to remote work for everyone has really done is really thinking, what are the deliverables of the job? What are the things that you would need to get done? And how do you keep an open line of communication about, if Colleen and I are working on a project, it's not that, okay, Colleen, are you going to do this today or tomorrow? Let me know once it's done. But this concept of, here's this thing that needs to get done, Colleen, how do we make sure that that moves forward? And what do you need from me? And not micromanaging Colleen in that space around kind of, or you need to do this by tomorrow too, but really having open conversations around shifting what does it mean to have work. I have a kid, as I mentioned. Many of us on our team, and I think Jordana will talk about it in a little bit, has set different schedules. But different doesn't just necessarily mean that it's bad, but different is just that we need to be open around communication, and that sometimes we might be out of pocket for hours during the traditional workday, but that's okay as long as we communicate with each other, make sure the flow of information forward, and that we're communicating kind of the deliverables and the things that we're responsible for.
So as Nathan just said, a big part of working with your remote colleagues, as well as remote staff as a supervisor, is accommodating schedule needs. So, we have folks working across the country, and we'll need to accommodate folks' time zone. So we know that we have a meeting with our colleagues working in the Denver office or on the West Coast. The earliest that we will schedule a meeting is noon, so that they don't have a meeting first thing in the morning or 6:30 their time, 6:30 a.m. their time. Being aware of those folks' schedules, as well as changes around kids' schedules or around schedules for if you have dependents at home, whether it's a child or a parent that you're caring for, as well as caring for other family needs and other personal needs. Checking in before setting up meetings and ensuring availability is incredibly important, and as well as making sure that your own calendar is updated, so if someone needs to make an appointment with you or schedule a meeting with you, they know what your availabilities are. Another big piece is building a culture of bringing people in. So if you have a meeting and think that someone should be involved, take a minute to reach out to that person and invite them to that meeting, see if they're available. Making those connections amongst your staff and making sure that the key folks on your staff are keyed in and have those resources available to them makes folks not only feel included, but creates a culture of really being able to work together. Especially right now, a lot of folks are probably feeling a lot of virtual fatigue. If you were not used to having a lot of online meetings, or you're having more online meetings than you normally would, virtual fatigue is a big thing. So making sure that you're not only on for the meeting, but like on camera can be really difficult for a lot of folks. So making sure that you're scheduling the meeting that you're scheduling needs to be a meeting and doesn't need to be an email or an offline conversation of some kind over Google Hangouts, Slack. We use a feature called Ring Central to chat with each other in a text-based chat, and having those chats set up not just for your team, but other teams that you're working on. So our REV team has a chat that's just us, the four of us, to chat about things that we need to talk about, as well as team chats for other projects that you're working on. Clear communication. Regardless of how you're communicating, whether it's in a meeting, an email, a chat over a chat function that you have, or a phone call, being clear about what you're talking about, the project that you're working on, next steps, tasks, and to-dos is important, regardless of when and how you're working, but especially when you're working in this virtual space and you're not right directly with a colleague. And when you do have those communications, have an agenda, have a reason, have a plan for that communication and for that meeting. For any meeting, share that agenda ahead of time so folks are keyed into what's going on and can be well prepared ahead of time and can come to that meeting with ideas and next steps and can feel prepared and ready to chat. And finally, as Nathan mentioned in our last slide, trust your colleagues. If you are working together on a project with your colleagues, whether it's the team that you work with all the time or colleagues that you only work with once in a while, trust that they're doing their work. You're all adults, we're all adults, and we should be able to trust each other that you're getting the job done. Just as you wouldn't want your supervisor to micromanage you, you wouldn't want to micromanage a colleague about getting a project done and checking in constantly about whether something is done or not. So find ways to check in with one another that aren't micromanaging, but at the same time, make sure to trust those folks to do their job.
So as Nathan has mentioned, I have been working fully remote for about a year and a half now, but I started, at the DC office, and I've always traditionally worked in an office environment. I'm probably one of the very few people, at least according to my social media feed, that loves working from home. I really enjoy it. I find myself to be very productive in this space. And I don't know if that comes just from experience and time. The first 14 years of my career was spent in an office environment, some with doors, some without, some in a cubicle space, some, on Capitol Hill. And now I get to work from home, and I find that to be a really delightful and welcome change. And so, but I know that many of you find this new normal to be somewhat stressful. So hopefully I can sort of share a little bit about some additional tips for working remotely. One obviously is to be available and to learn to disconnect. And so if you've set your hours and if you've been really intentional about that, be available. That doesn't mean that you don't ever leave your desk or your space or your seat, wherever it is that you've set up your home working space, but know that people are going to be asking you questions. So kind of back a little bit to that trust your colleagues thing. You are going to step away from your computer, and you should. I recently saw this morning a post from somebody who felt that they were stuck and glued to their computer and to their desk for 8 hours a day, and physically could not move because something might come in, whether it's an email, a text, a chat, whatever it is. This is really no different from working in the office. You still have to get up to do everything, like go to the restroom or grab a drink or take a walk or get some coffee. Except now, instead of walking a couple of blocks to get coffee, it might just be like a few steps to your kitchen. But don't lose that routine. So if, every morning you walk to Starbucks at 10:30, and that's like your thing, and you're still keeping similar hours, at 10:30, go and walk and get yourself some coffee. And if coffee is really close by, as in in your kitchen, go walk up and down your hallway or go drink your coffee somewhere else. Do not drink that at your desk. Same thing goes for lunch. I put my lunch on my calendar. I know many of my colleagues as well do. Don't eat your lunch at your desk. I know that's something that I have tried to do even when I was in an office environment. I know a lot of us do that. It's like a bad habit. But if your workstation is not at your dining room table and you have the opportunity to walk away, go have lunch, get out of there and go do something, even if it is just for a few minutes. And then learn how to disconnect. Again, it's really necessary, and it feels like if you're at home, you can answer emails any time of the day, or you can check on things throughout the day every time. One of the ways that I found to be really helpful, and obviously this is probably a little bit more difficult now that we don't have a lot of opportunities to be outside, but if you do continue working remotely, or if there is an opportunity for you to become a little bit more virtual in your work, schedule things that have to happen either before work or after work. So if you want to do that virtual workout, schedule, and your work is done at 5, schedule it at 5:30, because then that forces you to walk away from your computer after work and to go do something else, even if it is another virtual space. And so I think that's one of the great ways that I've been able to separate, in more normal times or more traditional times, my work hours usually end, and then 30 minutes after work ends, I have nothing but personal work. So things that are happening in my personal life that are scheduled, and I've scheduled a lot of those things very intentionally because that doesn't give me time to sit around and look at email or answer some things. That's not to say that you're not going to, or there's not going to be something that is going to require you to answer things at a little bit more of, outside of your work hours, especially if you're working in a area that requires some immediacy in your response. But definitely look for times to disconnect. When your home is your office, you might find it easy to just keep on going, but turn your computer off, turn your phone off. I have my messaging app on my phone just because sometimes it's helpful for me to be able to take calls and messages around my house while I'm working remotely. But if you don't need to use your personal phone for your work messaging apps or anything like that, don't use it. I think that's perfectly reasonable to disconnect in that way. Stick to your work hours. Again, think about, even if it has to change regularly, I'd like to think that your staff, your colleagues, and your supervisors are being a little bit flexible on what needs to be done if there's room for that flexibility. I understand that some areas and some job functions don't really have that flexibility, but if you do, and even if you have to change that week by week just because situations change almost daily, stick to what those work hours are. Set them as your away message. Put them on your calendar. Be really good about doing that, and give yourself a routine that you can really stick to. Ask feedback from your supervisor. If you're able to create an open communication path with your supervisor, certainly do. Just so they know what you're working on. You don't have to give them a task list. You don't have to give them a list of things that you're working on every single day. But, just make sure that you have that communication with them. Now, some of you may not have the privilege of having that type of relationship with your supervisor. So what I will say that if that is the case, you probably do have a colleague who you can trust and who you can speak with. So definitely try to bounce ideas off of them. There's also a lot of online support spaces right now for people who are working remotely for the first time. And so if you don't have that line of communication open, if you are looking for ways to approach your supervisor, if you do feel that they are being really micromanagey, or if you feel like they are themselves struggling with some of these new normal virtual spaces, there are a lot of online spaces for you to connect with other remote workers specifically in your field or in your functional area. And so do reach out to me and to any of my other colleagues who are on this presentation right now. Some of us are in those spaces, and I'm happy to invite you to join them. It's been really helpful for me to better understand some of the needs of our staff and some of the needs that other people have. Again, I mentioned planning personal activities before and after work. So plan that workout before you have to log on and stick to it. So one, it's a great personal way for you to either work out, or you don't have to work out. No one's telling you to. Go take a walk, or you don't have a long commute anymore. And so maybe this is an opportunity to catch up on a little bit of sleep, and you can, hit that snooze button a little bit. And, don't feel like just because you wake up an hour before you have to get to work that you're just going to log on because you have nothing else to do. There's probably a million other things that you can do. So think of ways that you can be disconnected before and after work. And then giving yourself grace. This is a very different time for many of you. Like I said, some of us have never worked remotely before. Some of us really dislike working remotely, and some of us love it. And so, give yourself the time to really get used to what that means, whether that is trying to figure out how to battle that virtual fatigue, how to figure out how to set a schedule that makes sense for yourself. And if you have dependents or people who are depending on you for care, how that works around their schedules as well. So those are just a couple of tips. Hopefully this has been really helpful for those of you who have been working remotely. Again, this is definitely a different time. It's definitely new. And for some of you, you really don't like working remotely. Let me tell you, I've seen a lot of things on social media where people absolutely despise it. One thing that I thought was really exciting today, which might seem very trivial, but I posted it all over my social media, is that I knew I was going to be speaking with all of you today. So I put on mascara and lipstick. And I know that seems like such a trivial, small thing, but this is one of the first times since sort of the pandemic started and everybody started going remotely, that I really had a lot of FaceTime with folks in a virtual space. And so I know we all joke about being able to wear pajama pants or yoga pants and like not having to wash your hair for several days. But if putting on like a work shirt or brushing your hair or putting on mascara is what makes you feel connected and more normal and more in the office, do that. And the other thing I'll say from a virtual perspective is that we've all been working in a virtual space now for many, many years. We are constantly on our phones. We are constantly on social media. We are constantly looking at a screen, except now it very much feels like we don't have a choice. We have to be in this virtual space. And so I know that that mindset is hard to really wrap your mind around, but we've been working virtually for a long time. You might be working on volunteer spaces, which require you to call in. So, keep that in mind. Like, you're already an expert at working virtually and being in a virtual space. It's just that you might have been using it for more personal reasons or more personal, ways to get connected. So, so those are just a couple of my tips. I think, and one final thing, I'm so sorry, I think I might be going over my time, but if you are on video, it's really helpful to be on video. And I know that seems, I know some people are like, I don't want you to see the mess in my house, or I don't want you to see this space, or I don't have like an office. I actually have a home office here, but right now it's being used by my partner who is in that office. And so I'm actually in a different space in my house. But I think, I don't know how many of you have heard jokes or actually experienced things where you're on a conference call and you can't see anybody and everyone's sort of trying to talk on top of each other. And everyone's like, no, you go ahead. No, you go ahead. If you have a video platform, even if you're like on there for just a second, or if you do want to say something, put yourself on video. I think it makes it easier for your colleagues to really follow the conversation. And also it makes it easier for people to understand that you want space to speak as well. So I think being on video, even if it's for short spurts of time, can be really helpful, not just for yourself, so you can sort of put yourself in the mindset that it's your turn to speak, but also for your colleagues to feel like, okay, now Jordana needs to say something.
For those of you that were able to attend Celeste Headley, which was our keynote on Monday, she actually talked about studies have been shown that communication, when you can see the individual, are that much stronger. So obviously many of us are used to face-to-face and in-person communication, but just this concept of having a video on and being able to make those connections really does make a difference. So, we definitely do encourage when you can, make that transition. The last piece that we'll just offer before we get to questions, and again, feel free to kind of unmute yourself or type them into the chat, is this concept of, blurring the lines of what is appropriate. I think this concept that, many of us, both Jordana and I, have young children in our lives, not for children, but well, also for children. But, I think this concept that sometimes they show up in the video. And, I think we've had really good conversations over the past 2 weeks of, to both with Colleen and me, engage the child when you're on and don't just ignore it. And I think for us, we know you might be stressed out if you hear screaming in the background. We are more stressed out because we can't control that. And I think this grace that Jordana is talking about and having those relationships, I think only will continue. And I think this opportunity for everyone being remote does offer us to blur those personal and professional lives a little bit.
So now, as Jordana said, is the time. If you'd like to join us on video, or if you'd like to ask any questions, we're happy to answer any questions about our own experience, or share anything that you might want to share with the group that you have found useful in your time as a remote staff member.
I sort of mentioned that some of you have mentioned to me personally that you actually really hate working remotely, or if this is your first time working remotely. I'd love to know why. Again, like I said, I love it. I love that I have time to really concentrate on the work that I'm doing. I love that I can still see and chat with my colleagues several times a year in person, but I don't necessarily miss having someone in the office to talk to. I mean, I guess I kind of do because I have an office mate in my husband. But, I will say, I have always seen myself as a people person and as an extrovert. And so I was really surprised to see how well I adapted to working in a remote environment. And I've made a lot of changes in my lifestyle in order to accommodate that new normal. Danny, I don't know if you had the same experience when you went fully remote, but I changed a lot about how I just do things around my house and how I sort of schedule my day.
Yeah, I think for me going remote, and my process of going remote was kind of staggered because I left the campus experience to come work for Naspa. And I remember my first day of being at Naspa and going out to get lunch and realizing that I was in a like downtown city setting and I wasn't on a campus anymore. There weren't students everywhere. There was just really busy people walking very fast in suits heading to wherever it is that they were going. And then transitioning from that to now working fully remote, I think it's been an interesting experience. As many of you, I'm sure, I talk to my pets a lot more than they probably need to hear from me on a daily basis. It's also been interesting over the past 2 weeks. My partner has now started working from home as well. So we have, to Jordana's point of like, today I was like, I need the table today because I have to do this for a few hours. So you need to go sit somewhere else to go work. And it's an interesting experience as you start to define what remote work looks like for you. I think for me, as a remote staff member, I've gotten used to it. I was okay with it. I've been on lots of calls with a lot of people that are like, I can't stay home anymore. I don't know what to do. I'm just kind of like, meh, it's fine. You get used to it. But I know with everything that's happening out in the world right now, I've actually found myself feeling a little kind of stuck at home. And so now I have, in the afternoon, I do a daily walk with my dog and make sure that after work, to Jordana's point, we have a cutoff, 5 o'clock, I'm done. I will go spend half an hour, walk the dog, and then I can come back and kind of be reset.
I think another thing that we sort of heard about, and I'll just sort of keep throwing this out until somebody wants to unmute themselves because we do want to hear from you and we'd love to see you if you want to share your face with us. But somebody had mentioned that they had a supervisor who was asking for daily one-on-one, so like every single day, like a check-in, like an actual video check-in, and then asking them to write down everything that they do, like for their job, like on a daily basis. So I will tell you from a staff perspective, I would not appreciate it if Nathan called me every single day just to physically see my face. Because one, that's for me, very micromanagey. I think that would probably still be the same if I worked in an office. Like if I worked in an office and let's say I had a door and you expected to like sit down and talk to me face to face every single day, I would also find that to be just as irritating. Just because I don't see value in having a daily conversation with somebody I work with, especially if I'm trying to do work myself that like needs to get done.
I think it is also an opportunity, as we move forward, hopefully past COVID-19 and over the next few months, to rethink what is student affairs and what is your job. I think what's really been forced to happen for a lot of us is we've realized well, we can't be in person. Is there a way to turn these things virtual? As Danny talked about, we turned some of the NASPA annual conference virtual. And we know that the face-to-face is just as important. So there's not a want for NASPA to move everything virtually. As you move forward, and I think for those of you, whether you're in your job or maybe moving into a job, I believe student affairs is going to become more virtual and be more open to a remote sort of setting. I do have some colleagues and all four of us do, on campuses that do have like every second Friday they're able to work remote, or once a month. And I think these concepts of what are pieces that you can do outside of the office, and still be more productive, versus where, if you're running a program with your student leaders, that does have to be a face-to-face opportunity. So I think the concepts and the ideas that we are learning, from forcing to be remote, I encourage all of you to kind of think about moving forward. What are those different opportunities to shift the work that you're doing?
I'd also add on that point, I think it's an interesting piece. My experience as a remote staff member has made me realize that in the future, if I had to not be at NASPA, remote work is a part of my life now. It's something that I'm used to, and how we all think about this in future job searches or in your current job, as you start to negotiate and you start to think about stuff and be like, hey, remember that time where we were home for 3 weeks and everything was fine? I'd like to do that once a week. I'd like to figure out how I can continue to do that. And so for me now, as I think about the job market and I think about future opportunities, obviously I'm already remote. I can't get any more remote. But I think about that as a part of my negotiation of like, all right, cool. I like this experience. I think it's great. What does remote work look like for you? What are the opportunities that are available within this staff, within this department, to not be in the office every day? And I think that's a very difficult and different conversation for people to think about in a student affairs department. When I was on campus, I was doing student activities for the Honors College, and the idea of me not being in the office every day, and especially in the evenings for student programs, nobody would have thought about that. But we also never thought about doing virtual programs. And I'm sure there could have been plenty of students who would have been more engaged and would have found different opportunities with their schedules if we had done some virtual programming. And so now, as you think about that and you start to evolve your work, what does it look like? How do you talk to your supervisors about it? How do you talk to your colleagues about it? Recognizing that we're in a very different place, and is an opportunity to really start to evolve what engagement looks like, to include virtual spaces on a more regular basis.
I would also suggest, for those of you who are having difficulty sort of transitioning and wrapping your mind around sort of working remote in the long term, right? Like, so many of you might be in states that have stay-at-home orders, and so you don't really have a choice. Like, there's really, there's like an end date when that happens, but your office might not be ready to open. Your campus might not be ready to open. I think you should work with your colleagues, if you can, and talk about what it is about working from home that you find to be difficult, whether that's the human connection. Some things that come up, like people miss their commutes because they had that like hour to like listen to their favorite podcast, and now they feel like, they can't do that anymore. I definitely think that those two things are important for your colleagues and for your family, maybe even as well, to know about. So like, if you have a family, for example, and you miss that commute because that was like your one alone time, can you work that in there? Like, is that a conversation that you can open up and have? Like, can you be like, hey, from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., I'm going to commute. And even that means like sitting in your car, in your driveway, right? Like, sit outside and like listen to your podcast, like whatever it is. Like, just because you're working remotely doesn't mean that you have to give up some of these things that you can safely do while we're social distancing, but that it might be worth just talking about that as well. And I think it's important for your organization to know this, because I think what's going to come out of this entire situation is a really great opportunity to start really thinking about these processes. And like Danny said, like, what things could have been virtual or been done remotely before? And can you, if you feel like you are really acing this whole work at home thing, like if you really have figured out ways for your department to come together, for your staff to be productive, and to find things that you are able to work on, even if we don't have another global pandemic, right? Fingers crossed. This is like the only thing in my life. Like, I hope this is the only pandemic that I will ever experience in my lifetime, because this is very scary and very unreal. But I think it's never a bad idea to have plans in place, even if they seem like very surreal, not ever going to happen again plans, because weather is still going to happen. You might live in an area of the country where there are hurricanes, looking at Danny right now. You might be like in the middle, in the Midwest, you could have tornadoes that could completely just crash down and wipe out a lot of the services that you rely on, and you will be forced to work remotely. Or for those of you who are working remotely right now, what if you're working with colleagues or students who don't have that virtual access, right? Like, how are you dealing with that? Like, I know that must be very stressful for those of you who have colleagues who have spotty internet. I have been very fortunate to work with grad students from all over the country, but I have a grad student who works at a tribal institution, and they don't always have reliable internet, you know, on their reservation. That's just not something that is very commonplace or that they have access to. So, you know, what does that mean, as well as in terms of equity and access for those who don't always have it? So just a couple of things to think about as well. You know, it seems cliche, but, you know, can you turn this situation? Can you turn some of these pain points into something that can be really productive for you and for your staff? You know, is this a great time to update your standards of procedures and processes? You know, so when's the last time you guys went through your onboarding manual or your training manuals and actually had the opportunity to focus and sit down on it? So there's a lot of, and for those of you who might feel like, oh my gosh, I don't really have anything to do because I'm not talking to anyone, I don't physically have people coming into my office and interrupting me during the day and asking me questions or phone calls coming in, there are probably quite a number of things you could also be working on that you've maybe put away or put aside the last couple of months or the last couple of years. And, you know, this is a great time to resurrect some of those projects that do require a little bit more focus or do require you to not have people sort of around you all the time. So maybe that's something that you can consider as well.
For those of you that are just joining and are still with us, again, feel free to ask any questions, join the camera if you feel comfortable. Otherwise, I think the four of us will just continue sharing some thoughts. Colleen and Danny, I am curious, and again, I think this came up a little on Monday's conversation, but Colleen, you started, you know, in the office, but Danny was remote. And, you know, I think for me, both with Danny and Jordana, I had the opportunity to learn that, work with them while they were still physically in the office. Could you two share maybe kind of how that journey was for you and any tips you might have for individuals?
Danny, do you want to go first? Do you have thoughts? Okay. So thanks, Nathan, for that great question. I think for me, it was my first time working with with remote staff, because my previous positions had been, you know, with folks either right down the hall or right across the hall or, you know, in the cubicle next to me. And so working for Naspa was my first time working with any remote staff, but especially remote supervisor. But I think for me, I was very excited about that opportunity because I could already tell from my interview process and from talking with NASPA staff during that process and before I started, how clearly connected and how well connected the staff was. And so that was something that I was not worried about based off of those conversations. And getting started, I think it was and still is very important for Danny and I to have regular check-ins, but also that open door policy that you talked about earlier. You know, having opportunities to just check in and say hi and good morning and how was your weekend and kind of chatting about those things, whether it's on a call or over Ring Central, which for those of you who are just joining is our text chat that we have on in our system, and, you know, just kind of checking in on those things. And then if there were things that we needed to check in more regularly on, like setting that expectation of, okay, this is a bigger project that we are working on together or working on as a team, and so we're going to check in more regularly about those things. And so that was something those were some of the things that I think really helped in creating a good relationship and chatting, because it's not just about the work that you do, it's about the personal relationships as well. I'm very much a person who is going to connect with my colleagues on a personal level, not just we're going to get the work done and then move on. I am a person that's going to connect with you on a personal level and, you know, ask about your partner and ask about your kid and ask about your cat or your dog, or, you know, watch your Snapchat stories or your Instagram stories and be like, oh my God, your kids are so cute, or oh my God, your animals are so cute, and like chat about those things. So that's really important for me.
Yeah, I think for me it was a very interesting challenge when I had the opportunity to supervise Colleen remotely. It was my first time really supervising anyone aside from some grad students when I was on campus. But having a full-time person and having moved remotely, I was grateful to be able to do the interviews in person during the placement exchange. But really, that was kind of it. Like, we did a in-person interview, and then Colleen got hired, and then I was this is most of our life. This kind of video chatting, how are things going? And I think part of it is just making sure that you set a good groundwork for what the relationship's going to look like. I think to Jordana and Nathan's point, like, we don't check in every day virtually via video. It doesn't have to be like a, hey, it's 9 a.m., turn on your camera, I want to see what you're doing. We have an every other week actual one-on-one check-in, usually every day. It's like a quick, hey, how's your day going? Or here's this funny thing that I saw, or here's this really good article that I think you should read. And it has helped us really have an understanding within our own personal relationship, how we work well together. And I think it helps. For me, it's been very much a lot of the tips that we shared, I believe in and follow, and I trust Colleen to do her work, and her work product comes out exceptional every time. So being able to have that trust and that relationship and saying, all right, cool, I'm here, my open door if you need to talk. And that does happen where sometimes it doesn't have to be me going to Colleen, but Colleen being able to come to me and saying, hey, here is something I need to talk about. Do you have 5-10 minutes that we can do that? The same with Jordana, the same with Nathan. We're able to say, hey, I need a few minutes from you to talk, so that we're able to go through this, because it's going to be easier than an email or easier than a quick chat. The one piece I also wanted to talk about is the idea that we had within our own experience here in the office of going remote, is how we used to manage the remote process. So what you see now is very different than what we see when I first started with Naspa, when we first started going remote, and we changed the language. And as I said, we used to be a DC office with remote staff. And in that context, you would see a staff meeting where there would be one window and 40 people in one room around different telecom phones, and then maybe 2 or 3 other remote staff members in different windows. And so we would be able to sit on the call, and as a remote staff member, I'd have to be like, hi, I can't hear you, or please stop moving your keys across the desk. It sounds like nails on a chalkboard. And things that people didn't understand. And, you know, the meeting would end and there would just be people on the phone kind of like, are we done? People are laughing and joking. I don't know what's going on. And like, it changed how we had to start doing. And we actually changed as an association, as an organization, to having our staff meetings being fully remote. So even though there are staff members in the office who could easily meet together and then have us join, we realized that it wasn't an equitable process or an experience for everybody. So we went to fully remote. So we use this Ring Central software, and you can get up to 25 little Brady Bunch people on the screen, and we have just pages and pages of people who are online now. And it's a very different process than how we first started. And as you think about your staff meetings, as you think about evolving the work that you're doing, how do you ensure that if there are staff members who are remote or might be partially remote, or as we start going back on campus might want to become remote, how do you make it an equitable experience for them? And thinking through every single part of your process, how you ensure that they feel included in that.
One thing I think is really interesting about this whole virtual space as well is that everybody is like hyped to get on the virtual train, right? Like there are 1,000 virtual games going on, virtual happy hours. Kids are on Zoom, kids are on like Facebook Messenger. And there's this feeling of like FOMO for a lot of people. Like if I do not RSVP, like I got invited to like 4 different happy hours tonight, starting at like 5:30. I'm not going to any of them. Like I got stuff to do. I have like people to feed. I have a dog who I think may have gotten fed today. I have no idea. But there is this like sudden desire to almost like over connect with each other, right? Whereas like I haven't talked to half these people who are inviting me to virtual things in like literal years. Like I haven't seen you in person in a very long time, and now you're inviting me to like hang out with you on house party. You want me to go to a virtual happy hour. Oh, and do we want to watch Netflix together? Do you want to do all these things? Because people suddenly feel trapped and like very much like isolated from everybody else, right? And so that can also be really stressful. Like I don't know, for those of you who are introverts, I'm looking at like my team, I'm like, are we introverts? Like sort of. But Colleen's like, "Ah." But as a self-described extrovert, I do not want to hang out with you on video after I've been on video all day, right? Like I just am not that interested. So you know what I'm going to do after I'm off this call is I'm going to go listen to the news, and I'm going to go listen to a podcast, and I'm going to do basically anything that doesn't involve other people. Because being in a virtual space is still being around a lot of people all the time and like listening to them. And for those of you who've been with us like this entire time, you've listened to a lot of different people talk. So we're very grateful that you're here, but this can also be really like exhausting, that virtual fatigue that Colleen was talking about. So, you know, you don't have to say yes to any of these things. And if people like decline your virtual happy hours or your virtual invitations, remember that they probably have been on Zoom or Ring Central or Google Hangouts or whatever it is for a while. And, you know, maybe the levity they need is not more like, you know, virtual cheersing over the camera, but like they need to just sort of get away and like have some of that space to themselves.
And to that same point, Jordana, like you're on your video calls and you're checking your email and you're still working throughout the day. You're still doing the same work or something similar to the same work that you've been doing before you've gone home and are working at home. And so you still need to decompress from your day. You know, you've been working for 7.5, 8 hours, and you've been answering emails and you've been talking to people and you've been having these meetings. And you still, at the end of your day, you know, a month ago, you still needed to go home and decompress, and whether it was cook dinner or play video games or read a book or listen to a podcast or whatever you were doing to decompress when you got home, do a craft, work out, you still need to do that at the end of your day. So it's important to take that time to yourself to decompress and, you know, take that minute, hour, 4 hours to yourself and just have that me time. And for some of us, that me time and that energizing comes from alone time if you're an introvert, from having that virtual happy hour if you're an extrovert, from declining that virtual happy hour if you are an extrovert but just need time alone. You know, similar to Jordana, I have had, you know, folks reach out to me who I talk with. Maybe I text with them or I have a group chat going with them on Facebook or something else that live all across the country, but we've never done a virtual happy hour before. Why are we going to do it now? And it's great to see their faces and it's wonderful to hang out with them and chat with them, but we always have this opportunity. And now, but people are reacting to being required to be home versus choosing to be home. And there is a distinct difference there.
You know, and I think it's one of those two. I think as we think about moving forward, I know in this transition, there's been a lot of weekend meetings that are related to work, and what I would encourage all of you to do is try to maintain your weekend. And Colleen and I talked about this Monday. I was like, "How's the weekend? Same as same old?" And she's like, "Well, no, because I didn't open the book, or you know, my laptop on the laptop on Saturday and Sunday." So I think those are things that I would encourage you to maintain as much as you're able to once we kind of get into this cycle. Danny, I don't know if we're going to get any questions, but thank you all for kind of staying on and listening to us kind of reflect a little bit more. Do you want to talk about kind of where the next couple of weeks are and kind of how we plan to continue these conversations?
Yeah, so thank you all for joining us that have been with us. I hope that you have enjoyed listening to the REV team. This is what a staff meeting looks like for us. Over the next few weeks, we will have people join us every Thursday, 1 o'clock starting with an essay chat, and then going from 2 to 5 p.m. with a series of different presentations across a varied field of higher ed and student affairs. It will very much feel like a conference experience because each topic may not connect to the next one, and it might be you just happen to sit in on a room and hear a topic and decide if you want to stick around for it. But you're welcome to hang out with us for our virtual conference for emerging professionals every Thursday from 1 to 5 p.m. Eastern. We'll have the Ring Central link that will be available from the 2 to 5 p.m. slot, and then 1 to 2 is actually going to be on Twitter through the essay chat. So thank you all so much for joining us today. We're incredibly grateful to you all. Hope that you have a great rest of your day. And as it's almost 5 o'clock, at least here Eastern, I hope that you are able to disengage for a little bit.
Oh, Danny,
the screen.
Can I add one more thing that I realized as we kept doing this in just this webinar, was, asking people to feel free to unmute and to contribute. Don't force people to contribute though. Okay, so like if you're running a meeting or if you're like a supervisor and just because now you've like got Colleen pinned into like a little virtual box, this is not the time to be like, oh, Colleen like never talks in meetings whenever we're together. She just sits there and listens. Please let Colleen continue to sit there and listen if that is her jam. Do not call people out in virtual meetings. If you wouldn't do that in person, don't do it in a virtual space. And so I think I would say, keep that in mind when you're meeting with people and you're having conversations, that there's really nothing different about this space than there is in an in-person space, except I could mute myself, which is great because it's really awkward in a meeting when you're coughing and everybody has to hear you. So, but don't force people to answer questions or don't force people to participate in things. I know people are trying to figure out icebreakers for their staff meetings, and my staff knows that I am not an icebreaker person. But if somebody on your staff is not really a participant, even in person, don't use a virtual space as an excuse to force them out of their shell either, because this is already very stressful for a lot of people, and then making people further go outside of their comfort zone will make the experience that much more worse for them in the long run.
We've all done Strengths Quest or Myers-Briggs or DISC or some other personality assessment with your staff, and you already all know, or generally know, if not exactly, a general idea of what your staff is like and your colleagues are like in person. They're going to be the same way for the most part on video, and they may even react a little bit differently on video. The person who is very apt to add in their 2 cents may be even more apt to add in their 2 cents, or may actually retreat a little bit if they're on video. So, unless you're having an active conversation around planning something and you need every single person to put in their 2 cents, don't force somebody to do that. And if you do need everyone to put in their 2 cents, tell them ahead of time. This kind of goes back to our keep an agenda and share that agenda piece from earlier. If you absolutely need everyone to contribute to that conversation, make sure that you are sharing that ahead of time so that they can come prepared to the conversation with that thing to add. And also recognize that just as in an in-person meeting, somebody else may have already shared what they've shared and they don't feel the need to reiterate what has already been said. So. Thanks, y'all, for joining.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.